in the Samoan culture, we have a chieftainship system in two basic classes. One is the chief, and then you have what is known as orators. So I'm an orator class. That's my chieftain name, Faleomavaega. It means a house where important things are done or being discussed. Fale is house, and in Hawaiian is hale, and Tahitian is fade. So meaning the same thing, means house. Fale o Mavaega means a house where important things or decisions are made. Our culture is very much closely associated with families. Of course, you have your immediate family, and then we also have what is known as the extended family, or you might say even clans in that respect. So I may be related to 15 or 20 different clans, both on my mother's side and my father's side. So the Samoan society or the culture is centered very much on family ties. And my clan that I'm a chief of, I would say probably we have maybe 1,000 people as members of the extended family. And if there are special occasions where the extended family needs to get together, especially if there are village activities and things of the sort, we have a chieftainship system within the family, and everybody pitches in to help, and so you might say it's a communal system, but it's very much closely associated with families. I don't think I'm any different from anybody else. If you're from Kansas, you're a lot of corn and a lot of barley and wheat, or if you're up in Colorado, you love your mountains. And coming from an island, of course, you pretty much associate yourself with what an island community is. My village is right next to the ocean. So in that respect, we are very much closely tied to the ocean. Do a lot of fishing, and in fact, my village were craftsmen. They build boats of the sort, and it's an island community in that respect. The word tattoo, there are two words the English language had adopted from Polynesian words. And one of them is tattoo, which is actually from the Samoan word tatau. In Tahitian, it's tatau. In Hawaiian, it's kakau. And that's the word where, well, it's an art form among the Polynesians, not just the Samoans. The Maoris tattoo their face, our Maori cousins. The Hawaiians are their body, shoulders, and even the body. And the Samoan tattoo is very unique. It's from the navel down to the knees. And so the Marquesas, they tattoo the whole body. So it was a very high art form among the Polynesians before the Europeans came to the islands. So you might say it is a rite of passage. Usually the young men in the late teens, you go through the ritual. It's about, well, they use the tusk of a wild boar or shark's teeth. They layer them in rows like a comb, but needles. And then the craftsmen would use a mallet and would dip it into a special dye that is made, and then they'll beat you to make sure the ink sticks under your skin. It took about a week, about 8 days. So it's a very refined form of art. Once you start, you cannot stop. You cannot say, I quit. You are worse off when you didn't start. But once the craftsman, we call tufua, strikes you, once he hits you, he has to finish the whole tatau. Start off with your tailbone, and the last token of the ritual is your belly button. So, give you some idea what how extensive the. It's not like one of those bombs. Well, you know, it's interesting. It was the sailors that when they came to the islands, they noticed the natives. You know, they form of tattoo. But rather than doing the native way, they put balm on their arms or whatever things that shows a sailor who's been away and all of that. Well, that really wasn't, and that's how the word tattoo started. It was from the Samoan word tatau. Well, it was when President Truman, by executive order, transferred the entire administration of the island from the Secretary of the Navy to the Secretary of the Interior. So my dad was in the Navy among hundreds of other Samoans that were in it. And so they decided when they had to transfer all this military men and their dependents to other destinations in the States. Some were sent to San Diego, others were sent to Oakland, and my dad's lot fell in Hawaii, so that we ended up in Hawaii. So about half of my life was in Hawaii in that respect. I did my first 2 years at what was then known as Church College of Hawaii. That's now known as BYU Hawaii in Hawaii. And I felt that if I was to do something or to contribute to the community, it would be important that I know something about the law. And I learned some fundamental things about studying law. It isn't that it teaches you what the law is, but it teaches you how to find the law. It teaches you how to think in a certain way. And I felt that I needed to get as much education as I could get. And after Houston Law School, I was able to get a fellowship to do a postgrad, and so that's why I went to UC Berkeley. And it was quite an experience from a school that is very conservative in many ways to a school where there are a bunch of hippies who wanted to kill them. Schools, especially during the 70s, you know, that you think of UC Berkeley as a hippie school, but in actuality, they were not even students that went to UC Berkeley. There are just a lot of, just people who just are just running the streets, but they were never students. And it was a very interesting experience that I had. And the contrast from coming from a place like Texas and going to the Bay Area like UC Berkeley was quite a contrast. It's quite an experience. What happened was that I joined the Army and spent a year in Vietnam. And that's when I then went to law school. But I wasn't an officer at the time. I just did my time and wanted to go back to school. But when I went back to Samoa, a young lieutenant was trying to organize a ready reserve unit in American Samoa to be part of the famous 100 Battalion 442nd Infantry. And he kept bugging me to please come help him recruit our boys, because at that time the 100 Battalion 442nd was seriously in jeopardy because there weren't enough reservists to continue the organization. And at that time, a Major General Walter Tagawa from Hawaii assigned this young lieutenant, who was a Samoan fellow, Mapu Jamaias, to go to Samoa and see if he can recruit some of the Samoan fellas to join the 100 Battalion 442nd. So that's when they got me to become a JAG officer to help. And I'm very, very happy that I was able to help the boys. And we now have 2 companies of the 100 Battalion 442nd Infantry in American Samoa. Besides Fafo, I was probably the most experienced person who has had Washington experience. In fact, that was the reason why High Chief Lou Tali asked me to be his running mate as his lieutenant governor, was because of my Washington experience. If I were to combine my 6 years with Congressman Burton and 2 years with Paramount Chief Fuimauno, I guess you might say that those 8 years of being here in Washington was probably equivalent to me working in American Samoa for 30 years in trying to understand how the system functions, how it operates. And so I think in that respect, I didn't have to learn a lesson. I knew that this is something that you cannot do. And let me tell you how much I admire and respect this man. I never forgot what he said. I told him I was going back home. He didn't want me to go back home. He wanted me to stay here. And I had it all made. I didn't have to go back home and, do the native thing, but I felt that I had to go. But I never forgot what Phil Burton said. Don't worry about these big corporations because they have batteries of lawyers that can defend themselves. It's the little guy out there who's trying to make ends meet, feed his family. That's the guy that you should be looking out for. The guys who are not representing the poor, the destitute, people who are really having, fundamental issues. And yes, I guess you might say that indigenous peoples of this country are the worst off economically, socially, are the Native Americans, believe it or not. Phil Burton is my hero. They think of him as an ultra-liberal, but in actuality, he works better with the most right-wing Republicans. This is what's amazing that I've learned about this man. He works just as well with Republicans, conservative Republicans, as he does with the liberals. And why is that? Because he would say in no uncertain terms about cut the BS, let's be operational, be practical, no nonsense. Let's not get into this ideology thing. Do something that is solvable and that's workable for the people. And I guess this is where part of my philosophy comes from. Well, I didn't even know that I would ever come back here. I don't think so. I think this is the way I look at it. When Phil Burton ran for Congress in San Francisco, he never forgot. He always told me this relative of mine who's bigger than Phil. Phil Burton's about 6'4", So he always said, Ernie Reed, you know how he talks, like a. So he would tell me that he would go to the meanest part of San Francisco, Hunters Point, I guess what it's called in San Francisco, and he would take these Samoans with him who are bigger than him, and because they're very active unionists, I guess he probably over the years kind of felt, well, I got to get me a Samoan kid to group, to work him and get him into the process. And I guess that's probably, he looked at me, he felt sorry for me and said, I got to get that Samoan kid over here. And I want to give him a little brush up about the realities of life. And it was because of the Samoan friends that he had who supported him. And like you said, every time he goes to the Hunters Point, he would take these Samoans with him. And of course, that's his constituency. People who try to make ends meet. And I try to do the same, I guess. Doesn't mean I don't love corporations. No, I love business. I love people who are good at making money. at the time in the 1800s, there was an interest among these three powers, the Great Britain, Germany, and the United States, in wanting to establish presence in these islands, the Samoan Islands. And at one time, there was a lot of interest, even at the time when Ulysses as President Grant. Some of his friends wanted to say that we want to establish some kind of a coaling station for shipping because it's right in the middle of the Pacific. And they felt that this particular island where the harbor was very well, that a coaling station would be perfect there for the ships, U.S. ships, commercial ships, as well as military would have an interest. And at one time, he even sent this friend of his, Colonel Steinberger, down to Samoa, and he was able to work all the island chiefs. Of course, at that time, there was no unified Samoan islands. We were still confederacies, still rivalries among the top paramount chiefs. They were killing each other at the time. In fact, Samoa was in a state of civil war when these superpowers came to the islands. And it was a very interesting story that had gunships there, right at the harbor, the Apia, the biggest, the second largest island. And a hurricane comes in. This is in 1899. It destroyed all of the gunships that were there, the Germans, the British, and the Americans. And the Samoans turned around and had to save the sailors from drowning. This is the biggest. And so that kind of took the tension out of these powers, superpowers that wanted to take possessions of the islands. So the Treaty of Berlin came about in trying to settle the islands until finally it was the 1899 treaty. Right here in Washington, D.C., it was called the Tripartite Convention, for which rather than these three powers fighting over the islands, it was conquest by denial, so to speak. So the Americans told the British and the Germans, hey, you guys have added to the two largest islands. We don't care what you guys do. The only thing we're interested in is this harbor. We want to set up this coaling station. So the British and the Germans says, okay, all the islands due west or whatever, the longitude and the parallel, whatever it is, the U.S. will deal with those natives living there, okay? And then the Americans would say, well, if you want to deal with the two largest islands, don't talk to us, talk to the British and the Germans. And that's how, and then the British and the Germans made a deal, true story, and to say, well, the British had an interest in Africa, so the Germans says, well, okay, well, because of that, we'll give up our interest in Africa. We'll set up station here in Western Samoa. So the British left and the Germans were there. From 1900 to 1917, in World War I, Germany lost the war, and it became under as a trustee of New Zealand. This is the two largest islands. In the meantime, the U.S. got what it wanted, which is the harbor. They really didn't care what the natives were doing. They just wanted the coaling station on this island. And so what happened was that the chiefs of my island in 1900 went and wrote out a treaty of what was called what we thought was a treaty of cession, but when it was translated into English, it became a deed of cession, okay? And then the other island, which is in Samoan culture and history, was the most sacred island. This commander, his name was Tilly, was having a hard time convincing this king of Manua, which is the other island, to come under the umbrella of the United States. But he had real hesitancy in becoming part like what Tutuila was. So the king Tui Manua, 4 years later, then had his own little, what we thought was a treaty, again, a deed of cession. All were sent to Washington, D.C. Never heard from them ever since. And we kept waiting and waiting. In the meantime, we had the commanders, naval officers, and we started building this coaling station on the island. It was not until 1929 that Congress finally ratified these two instruments of cession. And they're just simply say all military, civilian, judiciary authority is vested in the president. So Congress punted by just passing its authority under the Constitution to the President of the United States. President then, by executive order, assigned the Secretary of the Navy then to officially oversee the territory, okay? And that's how it was from 1929 all the way up to 1951. That President Truman changed the executive order, decided to give it to civilian authority, and the Secretary of the Interior also then took over the administration of the territory. So I always say we're somewhat like an Indian reservation, except we're a little further from the poor Indians here in continental U.S. And from 1951, that authority still stands. Secretary of the Interior is like the lead advocate for the territory, just like the American Indians. And that's why all the territories are under the authority of the Secretary of the Interior, because of the territorial clause in the Constitution, giving it, because all territories come under the authority of the Secretary of the Interior. Congress has the ultimate authority. American Samoa, even to this day, has the unique status that when you're born there, you're a U.S. national. You're not a U.S. citizen, unlike other U.S. territories. And the reason for this was that our forefathers were very hesitant about getting citizenship for fear that their lands and their culture would be taken away once they become U.S. citizens. So to this day, we are called U.S. nationals. Congress has not passed a law to declare us or to make us U.S. citizens. My dad changed our papers, I guess when I was very young. So the problem is that our culture is that you're given one name. And when you become a chief, then your name changes, and your name is that name that becomes a chief. So my dad was in the Navy, along with many other Samoans, sons of chiefs. And so he had no middle name or last name. He only went by the name Eni. And in Western culture, if you don't have a last name, it sounds like you're illegitimate or something, like, you know. And so he had to go through the courts to request that he has a last name. So technically, when he had his first in the service, he had no middle name, no last name. It was just Eni. So my name, so I would get confused myself in school when the teacher asked me, "What's your first name?" It's Eni. What's your last name? I guess it's Junior. So, and you know, like Junior Seau, the famous football player. Well, that's because his dad's name was Seau, and so the only other name he takes is Junior. You know, because our culture, you know, like, does Abraham have a last name? You know, when you think about Jesus Christ, it means Joshua the Messiah. But his real name is Joshua in Hebrew. He didn't have a last name. Neither did Adam or Methuselah or all these characters in the Bible. So why do you have to have a last name for? I think it was a Western European system. Does Elizabeth have a last name? Queen Elizabeth? It's just Queen Elizabeth. Out of respect for my culture, I felt that I was given a chieftain name, and I should honor it by using my chieftain name, Faleomavaega. Because at home, that's all I'm known as is Faleomavaega. And it's just Faleomavaega. Eni is just an incidental name to it, but when people address me, or by way in the formal settings, when you sit among chiefs and all of this, you are Faleomavaega, period. He felt very strongly about that. He felt that the people themselves should represent, good or bad, right or wrong. but he absolutely believed in representation. And I say that man has done more, not just for American Samoa, has done more for the territories than any other that I had ever known in my life's experience in working with him. Not just in Americans, all the Micronesian islands. The current status of Federated States of Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, Palau, are all because of Phil Burton. You wouldn't believe it was difficult for me even. How do you justify having a congressional delegate from this little dinky territory at that time with only about 40,000 people? And I kept asking Congressman Burton, isn't this somewhat of how do we justify having a small little territory being represented in the U.S. House of Representatives as a delegate? And Phil Burton it says it's not the population, it's because you're a territory. And that's all that mattered to him. Because Guam had a delegate, Virgin Islands had a delegate, Puerto Rico, of course, has a resident commissioner. And because we're a territory, as far as Phil Burton was concerned, you should also have representation. Now, the interesting thing about this, the Interior Department did not support the idea of these delegates coming from these territories because they wanted full control of whatever happens in the territory. And by the way, at that time we had appointed governors. It was part of the Plum Book where you had the highest GSA rating. This is where the political payoffs, I can tell you right off the bat, one of our appointed governors came from Washington State because he was a friend of Ehrlichman and the Nixon administration. And after that, one of our other governors was appointed as a Democrat because his father was chairman of the Interior Committee, Espinal. Another delegate that we had during the 60s when Kennedy came in was a friend of Stuart Udall. His name was Rex Lee. He was looking for a job. Another governor we had was my good friend Earl Ruth, who was a congressman from North Carolina. He was looking for a job. It was the GS-18 rating. You did not even have to get Senate confirmation. It was literally a pure plum job for political payoffs for whatever it is, whether it comes from the White House or from the Secretary of the Interior or from any other influences on whatever new administration we have, Republican, Democrat, or whatever. Under the Constitution of the United States, only representatives from each state votes on the floor of the House. So that's basically the constitutional requirement. You have to represent a district from a state, which gives reason why to this day the congressional delegate from the District of Columbia is still a delegate, does not have the full voting rights as other members because the District of Columbia is not a state. Okay, and the same is true with Puerto Rico, all the other U.S. territories. So we are given that status as delegates. But I recall in the 1940s, the delegates weren't even allowed to sit on the dais of the committee. They were not even members, nothing. So I say that we've come a long way in improving the situation where delegates now can vote in committee, can hold chairmanships, can introduce bills, can debate on the floor, do all other things as other members do, with that one exception, is voting for legislation on the floor. But I can vote in committee. So I realize that there's limitation, but I would say that for that one exception, not voting in the floor of the House, it's like I do 90% of the work, but that 10% of voting on the floor, even though that is the most critical aspect of it, being a fully member of Congress, is that you vote on final passage of legislation. And we're not allowed to do that simply because of the Constitution. I've always said that voting in the committee of the whole is more of a symbolic vote, really, because the way they developed the rule is that if on a committee vote, that the results of the vote was because of the delegates' vote, any member can call for a revote. So, which means it really doesn't make any sense of us voting in the first place if the tally of the votes came out as a result because we were voting on it. And then there's a revote. It's just more administrative thing. Now, this time around, the Speaker Boehner was absolutely against allowing delegates to vote in the committee of the whole. I don't know if it was because all 6 delegates are Democrats, or it's just simply as a matter of principle. He just felt that even in committee of the whole, delegates should not be allowed to vote, except that the matter was taken to court because of that provision that says that if, as a result of the vote taken, that the delegate vote made the difference in the outcome of the vote, then any member can call for a revote. So that so that cancels out any effort on our part. Is that if it really made a difference, it really did not. So that's why I call it symbolic vote. And I think I remember years ago it was Bob Walker from Pennsylvania. He was the official Republican objector on the floor. He said, "It counts when it doesn't count. It doesn't count when it counts," which means it really means nothing, you know. Well, one thing, you have to be bilingual. And when you speak the Samoan language, you have to speak it in an official capacity. It just depends who you talk to, but especially on a formal setting, then you have to speak the High Samoan, just like the High German, or And in that context, yeah, you have to be ready for that. And of course, you speak English. So whenever I do interviews or I do programs in Samoa, I always have to do it both in English as well as Samoan. And mainly for accommodating, especially our elderly population who are not very well versed in English. So you've got to, and then when you speak what you call the chieftain language, there's a certain level of communication that you have to do it as well. It does, because it's almost 70,000, and then there's about another 150,000 living in the United States and the state of Hawaii. I always say we're very tribal about our way, so I'm probably the only member that has to go to San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, or Hawaii, where we have communities there where I would attend to their community activities, and mainly because a lot of times they'd rather speak Samoan than. And I say, hey, this is your congressman or your congresswoman. They said, yeah, we know, but we'd rather talk to you. So we're very tribal in a way. So I have to do this to help them. They call me all over the country, and of course, our men and women in the military, I take care of them, and we also have a number from Western Samoa who live in the United States, and I try to help them as well. So it's a good mix in that regard. I try to go home at least once a month, but especially when we're in recess, at least for about a week, so make it worth my time, because the flights are very limited. They only go there twice a week out of Honolulu, or 3 times a week now. We have another airline that flies there, but I have to go through Western Samoa. You don't want to go there. You're talking about a 16-hour flight, not counting the wait in between the connections. If I were to fly from Washington, then I go to the West Coast, then I go to Hawaii, and then I go to to Samoa. I've always learned this from Phil Burton. Dealing with territorial issues, do not make it controversial, because the territories are so small. Don't get into the arena of the big issues, because you'll be eaten alive. And I absolutely believe this. In other words, if you've got a bill or something, don't make it controversial. Make it so that it's always a bipartisan sense of support, so to work it easily so that it's not controversial. And I've worked in situations where we're not majority, and you adjust. And I work very well with Republicans. In fact, sometimes I work better with Republicans than I do with my own Democratic Party, to tell you honestly. My African American brothers and sisters who are members of Congress, come on, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be said. They look after Africa. They look after Haiti. They look after communities outside of our country that are of African descent. And what's wrong with that? My Jewish members of Congress look after Israel. There's nothing wrong with that. 7 million Jews live here in this country. So by the same token, I don't think there's any reason, the fact that predominantly our society is mainly Eurocentric. And I fully understand and accept that reality. But at the same time, with the 15 million Asian Pacific Americans who live in this country, I think all that we're asking for the system is to be fair. I don't think we're asking for any special treatment. Just make sure that everybody's treated fairly on an equal basis, and that's it. Let's put it this way. North Korea. That's been an ongoing issue now for how many years? You think the 2.2 million Korean Americans living in this country do not have a sense of history or cultural ties to the mother country, South Korea, or even with that of North Korea? You know, one lesson that I learned from my Korean friends when I was in Korea, he said, the United States is our friend, but North Korea is our brothers. I mean, what better way to describe their concerns and their problems? You talk about the Taiwan Straits. You can talk about India. You can talk about China. Talk about Japan. These powerful countries economically. Now, China's number 2 in the world. 1.3, I always say this to my colleagues. I don't care whether it's communist or what, but to try to feed 1.3 billion people in this planet, that is quite a challenge for anybody. And I said, you got to give these people some credit of what they're trying to do. And still, 800 million Chinese still live below the poverty level. And the fact that Deng Xiaoping made this fateful decision in 1978 to turn around China's economy from a planned economy to that of a market system. And look at it now, that they've become very, very progressive. Of course, there's still a lot of problems with human rights and all this. But you've got to give these people some credit. And I kept reminding my colleagues, you know, there were 400 million Chinese in 1949 when China was reestablished again as a sovereign country after the Civil War and all that. 400 million. It's taken us 226 million just to achieve, what 310 million? So I have a different perspective from my colleagues. Sometimes when you look at Asia Pacific, you know, one size does not fit all. There's no question about that. The diversity of so many different cultures. You know, when I went to Cambodia, I went to see the killing fields. I mean, it's just unbelievable, the horrors that you can experience being a Vietnam veteran myself. And then when you go see Angkor Wat, I said, my gosh, and you think those castles in Europe are elaborate by any means when you look at these structures that are ancient and the diversity of culture that was there. I said, this is something that I want to share with my fellow Americans. Hey, we're all in this planet together, and we ought to work things out and solve the problems. You know, some of my colleagues think that China is the next monster. I said, my gosh, can we try to at least look at China as a strategic partner in solving some of these global issues? Because there is no way you're going to solve some of these issues without China's participation. No way. Well, because of my membership on the Foreign Affairs Committee, when I first became a member, this is 22 years ago, I really wanted to be on the Foreign Affairs because I felt that there was no member whose roots are from the Asia Pacific region that was on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And as I understood it, you had to serve at least 1 or 2 terms in order to qualify to be a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. So I pleaded my case with the leadership. With Tip O'Neill, I felt that there needs to be some diversity here, or infusion of the Asia Pacific, if you will, and so they allowed me to be a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Now, what was interesting is that when I got into the committee, nobody wanted to be on the Asia Pacific subcommittee. Well, I shouldn't say nobody, but the fact was that the 2 subcommittees that members really did not want to be members of was Asia Pacific and Africa. Because the entire mentality of Washington 22 years ago when I first became was Europe and the Middle East. Asia Pacific was not even on the map. It wasn't even on the radar screen. If we weren't bashing the Japanese, we were bashing the Chinese. It was never a positive sense of wanting to deal with the Asia Pacific region. So I will say that Steve Solars, God bless his heart, he just passed away recently, was chairman of the Asia Pacific Subcommittee, and I kind of more or less have been taking water for him for just learning, and very, very hard worker, but the most recognized expert on Asia Pacific issues in the Congress that I was aware of. And because he did a lot of traveling, he really did his homework and was very familiar with the issues affecting the Asia Pacific region. And I suspect one reason, if you look at the history, America has never had a positive relationship really with the Asia Pacific region. We can go further back than Commodore Perry, but bringing it upward to the fact that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941, okay? After that, disaster, and then the Korean War, which to this day still has not been solved. And then, of course, the Vietnam War really was another serious problem that we were never able. So I in my perspective, I think when we talk about Asia Pacific, look, we passed laws that even deny any Chinese even to immigrate to this country. So I think there's, on balance, there's a lot of racial feelings about people coming from the Asia Pacific region, unfortunately, but that's the reality that we're faced with. So now there's about 15 million Asia Pacific Americans in this country, which I'm very proud of and part of. And the bottom line, are we making a contribution to make this country better? I believe we are. And I believe we'll continue to do this. It has fisheries and also the insular areas. So that means it covers all the territories. All the issues affecting territories come under that subcommittee. So that's why all of us as delegates have to be on that committee, because that's the primary jurisdiction. And we are the counterpart to the Secretary of the Interior, who oversees all the U.S. territories. I'm also on the American Indian, Native American, and Native Alaska subcommittee, and simply because these are indigenous peoples. And I've always expressed an interest on the rights of indigenous peoples throughout the world that I don't think have been given fair treatment. I suppose you might put it in those terms. And my interest also to being on the Native American and Native Alaskan bill is because of the Native Hawaiians still have not been recognized by the federal government. 400,000 Native Hawaiians who are truly an indigenous peoples under the U.S. government are not recognized by the federal government. And you would not believe that the thinking that the reason why is because we don't want any special race-based favors given to any ethnic group. I said, but these are our indigenous people, like we give special consideration for Native Americans as we do Native Alaskans. So the way I look at it, there are only 3 truly indigenous peoples living in this country. The Native American Indians, the Native Alaskans, and the Native Hawaiians. But to this day, and Senator Akaka, God bless his heart, hopefully that we will get this bill passed when he retires next year, to give Native Hawaiians full recognition as Native Americans under the federal system. Norman Etta and I and gee whiz, I'm trying to think of the charter members when we first organized it. He was the force behind it and trying to get it more visibility for our Asian Pacific community. In fact, when I was a staffer for Phil Burton, we had a brown bag informal group. We had fellows that worked in the federal agency, and we would get together, informally all the time just to get together to kind of, hey, we are there. We're not that invisible. We need to really do something. And then we got that Asia Pacific Heritage Month that we did on a yearly basis until finally we got legislation to do that as well, So I think it was Congressman Frank Horton. Phil Burton would always let me go because he certainly has one of the biggest constituencies of our Asia Pacific community in San Francisco. Of course, out of New York, and yeah, that's how we started it. I remember. We have what is groupings of caucuses, and then we also have specific caucus of that one country. You see, so there are individual countries caucuses, and then there are also groupings. For example, I'm a co-chair of the Central Asian Caucus, which is comprised of 5 Central Asian countries. But then there's also a Kazakhstan caucus. And then these countries now I can spill them out very easily. Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, is because I've been to these countries, and it was part of my committee chairmanship. And I did the caucus for the purpose of bringing more visibility of these countries that I would say 99% of the American people have no idea that they existed. I don't think the American people didn't even know that these countries were former Soviet colonies for some 100 years before they became independent. This is only 20 years ago. So it's a learning process, and I try to encourage them to get into the groove and do your thing. KPAC, well, it's because of our Asia Pacific heritage. The Army is because as a veteran myself, and I'm very partisan towards military, and because this is one area too that I think many members have never had military experience, so they could never appreciate and really know what it means, military families, what they go through. There's a lot of pressure on me right now to run for the governorship, which is next year. But my standing position or response has always been I feel I can help our people more from here in Washington than I could going back and running for the governorship. But right now, I don't know what retirement means. So I guess it's just I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and I right now I don't have any desire to run for the governorship. If I were someone that I tried my best, I guess that would be the best way that I could say to be remembered. And I tried to do my best.